since enough people have asked. Here's the first answer. I've already explained to you guys. It was the desire of the Creator for us to walk in His ways. And when we were in the Garden of Eden, we couldn't experience death, and we couldn't experience sorrow, loss, or suffering. We could not experience disease or decay, because when we were in the Garden of Eden, we were immortal. As it is written, surely the day you eat from this tree is the day you'll die. We cannot experience death before eating from the tree. It's a hypothetical metaphor. When we were in that state of existence, a completely pure spiritual existence, we could not experience death, loss, suffering, sorrow. But it's written in Isaiah, Hashem, God creates evil. It doesn't say this during Genesis. It's written He made sorrow and suffering His hiding place. He wraps Himself in clouds of sorrow and gloom. He made darkness His hiding place, etc., etc., etc. The sages established that these verses and the entire point of this existence is for us to walk in His ways, to experience that which we could not experience when we were in the garden. We couldn't experience evil, death, sorrow, loss, suffering, decay, but all of these things are aspects of the Creator. It was His desire for us to walk in His ways. In order for us to do that, we needed to understand and experience and become one with that aspect of Him, which we could not experience as long as we were in the garden. Thus, He created a reality intentionally flawed, which is this reality. If you don't believe me that it's intentionally flawed, it's prophesied in the prophets, heaven and earth will pass away. It even says it in your New Testament. Yeshua says, heaven and earth will pass away, but not a jot or tittle will fail. It says the same thing in the book of Revelation. Heaven and earth will pass away. Why would heaven and earth pass away? Why would heaven pass away and earth pass away? Because He intentionally designed flawed existences by design, intentionally, so that we could experience the other aspect and be complete in all regards, something that we could not be before. Thus, the nature of the rulers of this reality are beings subjected to harsh judgment. They're only temporary. They're not needed in the long schema of things. They're only needed for so long as it requires the soul's refinement into sorrow, suffering, death, and loss, which is the nature of this existence. Must experience it to become and walk truly in the ways of the Creator, as it's written. That's the higher level understanding. Heaven will pass away. Many people say, I want to go to heaven. Do you really? If heaven is so chillin', if heaven's okay, why is heaven going to pass away? Why is heaven going to pass away if everything's okay in heaven? Don't be deceived. Man is made a ruler over the birds of the air. Don't be deceived. Okay, that's the higher answer. I'll give to you guys now the lower political sphere answer. Once again, I give a forewarning and a clause. What I'm about to tell you is not meant to infringe upon your beliefs, infringe upon your political beliefs. What I'm about to say could be completely chalked up into conspiratorial garble. It's up to you to make an informed decision and decide for yourself. So with that forewarning of what I'm about to say in terms of the political answer of the schema of this reality, I'll continue on from there. If you're smart and do some research, you will find the nature of a certain Mashiach named Shabtai Zvi, who declared himself the Messiah in the year 1666 and led essentially half of the Jewish people astray. He's essentially the reason why you have to be 40 years old to study the Kabbalah, etc., etc., etc. I won't go into much work on that because I'm not here to give a history lesson. Do some research on Shabtai Zvi. About 100 years later, someone named Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank claims to be a reincarnation of Shabtai Zvi. Well, Shabtai Zvi proclaimed himself to be the Messiah in the year 1666. Jacob Frank, obviously, then, by default, is considered the Messiah. He, in turn, found favor in a certain secular group of Sabbateans called the Dunmeh. Now, what's important to understand is that Shabtai Zvi, he was arrested at the time, and the Sultan said to him, if you're the Mashiach, if you're the Messiah, if I cut your head off, you'll put it back on. Obviously, he was not able to do that. So he said either you convert to Islam or you die. He converted over to Islam, and he found a great favor with the Sufi people. Fast forward about 100 years. He says something right before this. He says, well, if I'm not the Messiah can only come in one of two ways. when the world is in complete peace, when the world is in complete suffering. And because we can't all be saints, let us all be sinners. So they desire to build up this energy upon the planet, which is called Reshemu, which comes from the Hebrew word Rasha. Rasha means wicked, and Reshemu is the suffering, the sorrow, the energy of suffering that built up on an individual. They believed that if they could taint the planet with the Reshemu, with this sorrow, with this suffering, with this darkness, they could bring about the coming of the Messiah. Roughly 100 years come by. Now we're in the late 1700s. And yes, this is one of the founding members of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. I'm sure you guys have heard about the Illuminati. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, Adam Weishaupt. And this third person to found it was a person named Jacob Frank, who proclaimed himself to be a reincarnation of the aforementioned Shabtai Zvi. And this particular person who took up, as I said, Shabtai Zvi proclaimed himself to be the Messiah. Thus, Jacob Frank proclaimed himself to be the Messiah, God incarnate, basically. That's one of their belief systems. They believe they could not. There are two Messiahs in Judaism, Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. He believed that he could not bring forth Mashiach ben David, except it be by, as the aforementioned, Reshemu, the sorrow, suffering, and evil. And because the prophecies say that either Messiah will come when the world is in great peace or the world is in great evil, well, we can't all be saints, so let us all be sinners. So they geared and found it was an easier object for them to cause great suffering to the world. And thus, obviously, they began to do all types of horrible atrocities. They formed small groups and things like that, and they began to invert. They have what's called the law of inversion. If the Torah said, do not eat fat from a pig, or do not eat fat of an animal, it meant eat fat from an animal. Do not eat pig, eat pig. Do not kill, it meant kill. Do not have relations with your mother or father, it meant have relations with your mother and father. If it said do not have incest, it means to do all these things. So basically, the law of inversion states every single mitzvah, every single commandment that's written inside of the Old Testament is to be inverted, backwards. And thus, in doing this, thou shalt not put any god before me. Thus, put every god before him, etc., 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 etc. Right? And they believed that they were ultimately serving a higher purpose in doing this. Well, obviously, they started doing this in small groups. It wasn't enough. They had all kinds of abominable animal sacrifices and group meetings and things like that. I can't even get into the nature of its contents for the sensitivity of this TikTok life. But as I stated, they essentially realized it was essentially foolish to a small group of people to basically do abominable acts. And so they realized, well, how can we make the world suffer? So they attacked the financial institutions. And they believed that by targeting the financial institutions of the world, they could essentially cause the Reshemu, the evil, the wickedness, because Rasha means an evildoer, the Reshemu, the darkness of people, to essentially tinge the planet. And how do you go about doing that? Well, you do that by war. So they founded the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati in 1776. Jakob Frank, Adam Weishaupt, Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Go do your research. Don't just take my word for it. I'm just a guy on TikTok, for as far as you know. Go do your research. Research what I'm telling you. And as I said, they were the Gentile extension of this inner order that was called the Dunme, which is a derogatory term. They themselves did not call themselves bi, but this is ultimately their goal. So they began funding both sides of every war and causing wars to occur nonstop, essentially from their beginning. And that's what's happened. And that's how all these banking dynasties came into existence and how all these secret societies came into existence, because ultimately at the apex, they all have the same philosophical belief system. Many of the members of these secret societies and things are completely unaware of what I just told you. It is only amongst the absolute most noblest of elite that they'll even know what I just told you. Regardless of which, they said, well, because the world can't all be saints, let us all be sinners. That's why your wages are fixed. Why do you think your wages are fixed? Wait, you think you're ever going to save up to get out of it without entrepreneurship? You think you're going to escape the hamster wheel? The system's designed to strain you. Notice how your mortgage raises, but your wages from hourly wages don't raise. And if your hourly wages do raise, the mortgage raises higher than beyond that. I think it's the government says something, if you spend more than, I think 30% of your income on, rent, you won't even succeed in life. But hardly know anybody who can afford such things. Regardless of which, the system is not designed for you, as I said, it's not designed for you to be successful. It's designed intentionally for you to suffer, for you to bring about, to build up the building up of the rest of you, the darkness, the evil, the suffering, because they believe that doing this will cause the Messiah to emerge from the suffering. And as I said, the law of inversion means that when they lie, they're lying as an aspect of the Creator. They serve their God. They serve the Creator by lying to you. That's why they're so good at it, because they'll never tell you the truth. When Jacob Frank declared himself to be Messiah, he swore he would never in his life tell the truth. Not a single time. Not a single time. He would only lie. That's why you find it so easy, and people who are associated with these families and et cetera, these banking dynasties, they lie as a living. It's a form of their own worship. It's in their interest to deceive you. It's their interest to confuse you. It's in their interest to cause you suffering. So as I said, it's why the wages will never be past what they are, why you'll never make enough money to survive, why you'll never have enough money to simply exist. You'll run that cheese wheel and they'll milk you dry. Just like the Matrix, those machines feeding on the people. That's what they're doing to you right now. They're milking you for your suffering and your sorrow. And the more you suffer and the more you experience sorrow, the better their system is. But again, giving the disclaimer and the warning I already gave, it's up to you to accept or reject anything I just said. 100% educational. Borderline say it was even conspiratorial, so I gave a forewarning before I even spoke it, just in case TikTok Live freaks out on me. But yeah, that's your